Speaking of my books, I'm going to tell you of one of them. It is The Way of Love. It is the best, it's a 50-cent booklet, and it's the best booklet on love since Henry Drummond wrote The Greatest Thing in the World. There's one chapter in there on the 10 the Beatitudes of the married life. That's been published in magazines, reaching millions of people. Some ministers have printed separately also. They give them out to every married couple. Then I have given an address on the fine art of falling in love, and that they say I should be giving it to all the universities, all the, especially the co-educational colleges of America. Well, that is in there, and I think it's a work of art. If you don't know how to advise the young people on the art of falling in love, there you'll find it. Now, I'm referring to that book and another one, On the Wings of Prayer, which is filled with, has 28 pictures, I believe, of Roland Brown and Marcia Brown and myself, and it gives a journey around the world, and if you would read a chapter in that before you'd hear me tomorrow morning on that journey, and perhaps follow it up afterwards, you would know the whole world situation better than any way I can think of. Every senator and every congressman in America has copies of that. And I visited Harold Stosson, Secretary of Discernment. I saw a copy of it on his table. Now, we're hoping that I feel the congressman would all read that book. And Edmund himself, a man I went in to hear yesterday, Mr. Bowles, I think that he has the best vision of the world, how to solve the world problems of any man I know. In fact, I could pick out a little group of men that I would suggest Dulles sit down and meet with, and we could work out a plan that would just, well, wouldn't have to resort to arms at all. We'd just sweep communism off the field by a new, Frank Laubach, one of the men I'd want to sit in with him. He is the one that coined that word, Operation Awake, a war of amazing kindness everywhere. How many of you folks here have ever been to a Camps Farthest Out? I don't think that, oh my goodness, there's 6 of you here, 6 or 7. Now, as most of you have not been there, I'm going to tell you a secret of prayer power that we have. Now, you'd like to know when the first Camp Farthest Out was started, and I'm going to tell you. I can't give you the exact day in February or March, but I can tell you it came 3,000 years ago. It was the first Camp Farthest Out. It is called the School of the Prophets. It's different from the School of the Priests. It wasn't like a theological seminary where the church teach you church history and how to conduct funerals and rituals of the church. They remember canvas and how to give sermons and so on. A School of the Prophets teach only 2 things: how to pray and how to practice the presence of God. I've talked with professors in divinity schools, and the one thing they say they don't teach in the theological seminary is how to pray. Well, that's all that we do at the Camp Farthest Out, so we feel that we are a lineal descendant of the Camp Farthest Out that Elisha started. Now, Elisha had more answers to prayer than anyone in the Old Testament, although there were many of them trivial ones, little ones. I don't put him as the great prophet, but he was he had mastered the technique of prayer in a marvelous way. But he didn't write any book on prayer. However, you'll find in the 6th chapter of the 2nd book of Kings, the first 7 verses, you'll find in 2 of those verses the whole secret code of prayer that he used. Now, in 1941, we started our Camp Farthest Out in California at Glendora. After having a meeting there 2 years, the people came and said to me, this place is too small for us. It's too straight for us. Let us go down to Whittier College. So we went there for 2 years, and then they said, this place is too small for us. Let's go to Pomona College. After 2 years at Pomona, they said, this place is too small for us. So we went to Redlands University, where we've been meeting ever since. Now, that's exactly the experience of a Camp Farthest Out. And so this first Camp Farthest Out, a young man came to Elisha and said, this place is too small for us. Let us go down to the Jordan, and we'll each of us cut down a tree, and we'll build a larger camp. Now, Elisha had only one thing in common with me, and that is he was lazy. He never did anything he got anyone else to do, so he went over and sat on the log, and he said, go ye. Then the young man said, won't you go too? And then to my surprise, the young man's surprise, and I think to Elisha's surprise, he said, I will go. You know, he didn't do anything. He didn't even pick the young man up that was dying and carried him up in the prophet's chamber. Elisha did. Now, Elijah was the muscular, motive type. He did everything himself. He dug the ground filled it with water for the fire from heaven to come down. But Elisha, the mother of the boy, sent a servant out to bring Elisha in. And she said, I know what he'll do. He'll just give his staff. The servant said, you can do it. Sure enough, he went out. She met the servant coming in with the staff. I think she took Elisha by the ear, and he said, you've got to come too. And she had carried the boy up in the prophet's chamber herself. Well, Naaman, the general, famous in his day as MacArthur or Eisenhower in ours, came down with a great cavalcade. Elisha just remained in his room, reading the Reader's Digest, and he just said, you go out and tell General Naaman to jump in the lake. Tell him to jump in the Jordan 7 times. Well, Naaman got angry. He said, at least he should have come out and bowed. That's why Elisha, so Elisha said, go you. And now for the first time, he says, all right, I'll go. And he goes down there. The young man was chopping away, and all of a sudden the axe head flew into the water, and he cried out, alas, it was borrowed. Now, I'm one of those that maintains the trouble with the world today is we give too much attention to the outside things. I think in the theological sense we give too much attention to how to make gestures or how to read church history and all that. And the inner thing, the axe head, prayer, is neglected. I think in our churches we give too much attention to building great big churches. That's why I like this idea of building smaller churches and not trying to center around one great personality, one great orator, and when he dies, then what do they do? They have a great big elephant on their hands. I believe they have this put emphasis on prayer, on the axe head. Now, I'll say very frankly, my gestures and my delivery is very poor. My voice is not very strong. I have to use this. All I've got is something that's borrowed. And if I would lose that, I might just well quit. So unless, I want to stress the thing that's borrowed from above. That's what you must be careful. Don't lose it. Now, in those 2 sentences, you're going to find the whole secret code of Elisha's secret method of prayer. He said, where did you lose it? Now, that's exactly what the psychiatrist asked. Where did this thing begin? Jesus himself, the first psychiatrist ever lived, he said to the father of the epileptic boy, where did this begin? Why, as a boy, just to swim in the water, come to the fire. All right, I just want to know when it began. My daughter, married to a Baptist minister, Colonel Olson, lived in Dayton. They had a church in Dayton, Ohio. She wrote me that a lovely woman there, Mrs. Arnold, had a daughter, married daughter in South Carolina, Mrs. Carnes, who hadn't been able to hold any food for 4 years. That is, she had to eat 10 meals a day to keep alive, and she could hold the meal just for a few minutes before she'd lose it. She'd only held 4 meals in 4 years, and she was just fading away until she was skin and bone. And the doctors had examined her, hadn't found anything the matter with her physically or mentally. And Mrs. Arnold was she would pay the round trip up to St. Paul if I'd pray for her. And I said, I wrote back, I didn't want anyone to, with all that expense, to come up to see me. I hadn't healed anyone. If there's any power in God had done some healing through me, but it was all borrowed. But I said, I'm going to be in Atlanta next month, and if she could hold out till that, maybe she'd just start a trip over to Atlanta. And sure enough, there she was on the front seat with her husband. And after the lecture, I asked her, where did you lose it? Where did you lose the accent? Where did you lose your power to assimilate food? She said, when I was married, I was afraid if I got too fat, my husband would stop loving me. I said, well, now your subconscious heard you say that. And your subconscious is the most active servant anyone ever had. It's your little bodyguard. We'll call your subconscious Little Junior. And so Little Junior said, I'll see that you don't get too fat. On second thought, I'll just see you don't get any fat. I'm going to do a good job of this. I said, you must have a wonderful subconscious. It serves you so well. Are you afraid your husband will stop loving you now if you got too fat? Oh, no. He stuck to me through thick and thin, especially thin. And I said, Little Junior, did you hear her say that? Now she wants some fat. You've been wonderful in seeing that she didn't get any fat. Now you just use the same efficiency and see that she gets some. I said, you come to the hotel tomorrow and eat a big breakfast, you and your husband, at my hotel, and eat breakfast with me. 11 months later, I was in Greenville, South Carolina. I was speaking in the Methodist Church. I think it was the 14th of February. The church was full, 1,200 people. They had to turn away 100. I said to the minister, did they turn out like this? Oh, no, he said. But for practically all year long, people have been, when they meet Helen Carnes on the street, they say, what's happened to you? And she'd say, well, you come to Methodist Church the 14th of February and you'll see what happened to me. She gained 35 pounds, just the shape of a Venus de Milo. I have to explain that because we ought to be afraid to have me pray for them. They knew they're going to get 35 pounds right away. She's now head of the spiritual life work in the Greenville. She's been chairman of the council ring of the Camps Farthest Out in North Carolina, and it's become such a popular camp they have to have two of them, one in succession. And so all came about because I asked Elisha's question, where did you lose it? Now that's the first thing. You get back there and find where the thing began, and pull it out by the roots. That's one of the things. Now the second secret of that lifeless prayer is summed up in the next sentence. He took a stick and he tossed it out where the thing was lost. Now he didn't pick up a sequoia tree. He didn't pick up a little straw that the wind would blow away. He took something that fitted his grasp. He threw it out there and the axe head came swimming up. Well, you say that's I imagine some very liberal theological seminaries will say, oh, that is, of course, just a tradition or superstition because an axe head couldn't swim, couldn't float. Folks, I got on in a building 100 times as long as this building, this room, and it floated. It's made of steel and iron. It took me across to England. Some years later, I got on a building that was 5 times as long as this room, made of iron and steel, and it went flying through the air. It took Roland Brown, Marcia Brown, me all around the world. Why, a matter of a little axe head floating is just tiddlywinks. I won't even discuss it. I'm going to tell you what it represents. Take hold of something you can grasp with your intellect. Transfer that same knowing, that positive knowing, and that's the conviction over here in the realm of the Spirit, and toss it out there and see what happens. Now here's a Roman captain. His bond slave was dying, and he had great love for him. He'd been a great help to him. He came to Jesus, and Jesus said, the implication has been that if you can get hold of something out here that you could know, absolutely know, not just believe, but know it. With all 4 feet, your subconscious, with your front feet and your rear feet, absolutely know it. And apply it over here in the realm of the Spirit, then your faith is so powerful that the answer can come. Well, he said, any verse in the Scriptures that you know. Get hold of that sometime. You just say, I just know that. No, unfortunately, he's a Roman. But they said, look, see that fire, that's the synagogue? He's a lover of our Scriptures, and he's paid for that with his own money. So he said, the elder said to Jesus, you must do what he please. Do your best to heal that man. Well, what is it you absolutely know? I'll tell you one thing I know. I don't know whether it'd be all right to use things out of the war experience that were in the realm of the spiritual. Or what do you mean? In the Roman army, every order given with authority is instantly obeyed or a head goes off. I know that. I don't just believe it. I know it. Because while I have men over me, I also have men under me. And when I say to one, goeth, he goeth. When I say to one, come, he cometh. Now, this bond slave of mine obeys every order given with authority. I think every cell in his body would respond and would obey. Now, I heard it said down in the marketplace that you speak differently than the scribes and the Pharisees, and that you speak as one having authority. Now, I know what authority is. Now, if you can speak with authority in the spiritual realm like I do in the military realm, I know that every cell in his body will obey. So you won't even need to come to my house. You can just give the word right here. You know what Jesus said? He said, I haven't seen such faith, no, not in Israel. Peter the Rock, John the beloved disciple, didn't have as much faith. I'm going to tell you some things. I have seen some faith at the Camps Farthest Out. It was as great as John the beloved disciple as Peter the Rock. You can have it right now. If you can take hold of something, you can take hold of and grasp, like the Roman captain did, and convert over here. By just a God-given chance, we were, on our journey around the world, we happened to, we had the privilege of speaking in the most influential church for the most influential ministry in Rome. He says you can get hold of him. When Roland Brown comes back, they'll arrange marvelous meetings for him. I was very fortunate. I was being led of the Lord to start my talk just as God directed, as I think St. Paul was on Mars Hill when he referred to the altar to an unknown God. I said, Jesus, the greatest compliment Jesus ever bestowed upon any mortal man was bestowed upon a Roman captain. Right in the front row sat a Roman captain that they all loved, and I didn't know that. So from that moment, they all listened to the way 2/3 of the audience were men. And I told them of how Jesus responded to that faith of that Roman captain. Now, there's a woman that had spent all her money on an affliction she had, a hemorrhage, a constant hemorrhage, and John Hopkins couldn't help her. Mayo Hospital couldn't help her. She spent all her money on the doctors. She couldn't, I'll tell you why they couldn't help her. They were too far away. John Hopkins Hospital is too far away, not in space, but in time. It is 2,000 years away from her because she lived in the days of Julius Caesar. But one day she said, I got hold of something. She said to her sister, that man of Nazareth said on the mountain, he said, if your child asked for bread, you wouldn't give him a stone. And I know that I make all the garments for my family, and when they get frayed out, I hem them up. Now, I know I didn't put a lot of love into those garments, but not as much love in them as Heavenly Father put in making my body. Now, if I can hem up the garments, and they're torn, of my children, why couldn't Heavenly Father, when I ask Him, hem up my body when it needs it? If I could just get hold of something that'd give me that faith. I know, she said. Oh, I got an inspiration. I admire that garment, all of one piece, woven from above, that the man of Galilee wears. And when he comes out to speak tomorrow, I'm going to run out and grab him by the hem of the garment And that will give me just the faith I need. And when I touch that hem, I'll just know, I'll be prayerful thought, that if I could hem the clothes of my children, the Heavenly Father that Jesus tells us about, could hem up the tear in my body. And you know what the sister said? Don't you dare. Why, that's the most terrible thing in the world. If the men see you grab a man of God by the hem of the garment, they just hustle you out of the city through the gates, and they'd stone you to death before the sun went down. So that door was closed. But the crowds gathered. And then she saw them clustering so tightly together, and he's going through the crowd. A daring thought came to her, one of the most daring in the history of the Bible. She said, if I get behind that bunch of women all clumped together there, and as he goes by, I'll just kneel down and I'll reach under their garments, and I'll just touch the hem of his, and nobody will know it. And she succeeded so perfectly that nobody knew it. And no one ever would have known it. The account would never have gotten the Bible if Jesus himself hadn't stopped and said, somebody touched me. Why, of course, Peter said. Why, they just wronged you. I think Matthew said, I think at least 25 people in the last 5 steps you took must have touched you. I mean, somebody touched me on that inner plane with faith. I'm going back. He went back, and here's a woman, flushed with a radiant face. And he said, woman, your faith has made you whole. Not because you're a little selected, gifted group, I can tell you, make it confident of you folks. The Camps Farthest Out, one thing that differs from some other groups might be this. As I said, we're athletes of the Spirit. When the coach tells a boy how to run the hurdles, he doesn't write on a piece of paper, he goes out and runs it. At the Camps Farthest Out, when I tell them these things, they go out and put it into practice and see what happens. So when a woman came to me and said, I have had an inner flow of blood all years, will you pray for me? I said, well, let us go into the prayer room. And I asked Roberta Fletcher, our spiritual hostess, to come in with me. There's a picture of the great painting there of Solomon's Christ, the presence. I said, I have seen him do some of this painting. He's even consulted me, and I say he's taken my advice in one or 2 pictures he painted. He's a man of God. He's a very spiritual man, and he put love into that painting. And that beautiful garment, he painted it with great love, but he didn't put any more love into the making of that garment than God put in the making of your body. Now, it's all hemmed up, you notice? So I told her of the woman 2,000 years away who touched the hem of Jesus' garment. Now you kneel down and touch the hem of the garment in the picture, and Roberta and I will pray. And her hemorrhage stopped and never came back again. Now, I want to say absolutely, I'm telling you things that I don't want you just to come here. One reason I'm glad you're not a great big 10,000 audience that just come from curiosity. You go out and you use some of this method of Elisha and Jesus. Something where you can get a complete conviction over here, and then also in your practical life, and put it over here. See what happens. 2 months later, up in the Tampa, Minnesota, a woman came to me after the first day, and she said, oh, I'm so disappointed. I just got a letter. I've got to leave. I've got to leave tomorrow. I'm going to fly up to California. I said, well, why? Well, ever since my daughter's second child came, she's had a constant flow of blood. And there's the letter. She said, I just came from the doctor. He said, my blood count is getting so low, it won't be safe to wait any longer. I must be operated on next week. I said, let us come into the chapel and have a prayer. Well, here's a picture of Solomon's Christ with all the sheep around him. And I told her, as a woman of 2,000 years away, and she was a woman 2,000 miles away in Texas, I said, I'm going to ask you to get up on your tiptoes and touch the folds of the garment while I pray. And when I finished praying, I said, I know I got a surge of faith that came through me, and I feel that you had it. I feel that your daughter is healed. I'm going to suggest that instead of taking the plane tomorrow, that you send an air letter right away. It'll reach California in 2 days, and ask her to reply by return mail. In 4 days, you ought to get the reply, and ask her when she's to be operated on, when she wants you to be there, and so on. And then you'll still have time to get out there before next week.
4 days later, she came with a letter. She said, from her daughter, she said, I just came from the doctor. He says, now that all my organs are now perfectly sound, I won't need the operation. The following year, out in the Portland, Oregon Camps Farthest Out, I was telling this story, and a white-haired lady in the back row got up and she said, I'm the mother. I'm the mother that prayed with you at Coronas last year. And I want to say that the hemorrhage never came back. And I just got a letter this morning from my daughter that a third child has come and is a perfectly normal birth. Now you say, then why don't you put up a sign? Anyone that has any hemorrhages, just come here, and I've got a secret. I want to say that came because those folks came not to be healed. They came to a camp to learn how to pray. The conditions were just right, and I felt led to apply it. But I do want to say this. Jesus didn't have them touch the hem of his garment when that blind man. And as a leper, he didn't say, touch the hem of my garment. The only time the specific time it describes, and whenever any other person came that had a hemorrhage, he undoubtedly had them touch the hem of the garment. In other words, it's a specific thing. So I'm going on a little farther and give you some more levers, I call them. That is the secret of our power and prayer at the Camps Farthest Out. Find the lever that fits. Roland Brown, who was here the last year, had 3 troublemakers in his church. And he was in despair about the deacon. Oh, he's one of these long-faced deacons. One day, Roland said, wasn't it nice? They had such a good attendance. And the deacon said, yes, but think of all those who didn't come. Long, vertical face, nothing horizontal. So finally he got courage to take just 5 minutes a day for a solid month to send love. 5 minutes of love. And then for the month, the great storm came, just before church time. And when it was over, and the church was over, he said to the deacon, wasn't it too bad that storm came just at church time? Yes, but wasn't it wonderful how many came? Why, he had a new deacon. But the old lady who criticized, that was the worst. And it took him a long time to get courage up to even send love to her. It had taken some time for him to get the love to send to her. He criticized the minister twice a day and everybody else in the congregation once a day. Finally, he got the courage, and he went with hesitating steps. After he'd been praying for her for a month, knocked on the door, come in. And he opened the door and looked in timidly. Oh, Pastor Brown. Oh, how glad I'm to see you. I've been praying all week that you'd come. I have just been thinking what a wicked old woman I've been. Do you think God will ever forgive me? Will you forgive me? Why, you simply remain a church. And I'll tell you the lever they used. Marcia gave it to him. He wouldn't have taken hold of that because he had never baked bread, but she had, and she said, Jesus said, put a little pinch of leaven in 3 measures of meal, and presently the whole loaf will be leavened. Now, if you have as much faith in love as I had in yeast, and will put that love into those 3 measures of people, presently your whole church will be leavened. And it was. Now, it so happened that I was called to speak at Benton Harbor and discovered that is the city had the highest percentage of crime per capita in America. And a member of the pastors had come to hear me that night, and they begged me to come back again. I said, I'm all filled up this year, but Roland Brown, in such demand as a speaker now that he's resigned, stepping out of his church at Parkside, and he's going to give all his life now to this. It's still going where it's needed. Now let him come up and give you an address. And he came. And they liked him so well, the businessmen got together and said, let us just hire that man if he's free for 7 months. Tell him to go up here and speak in all the churches, to the women's groups, the Kiwanis and the Rotary clubs and the jails and the prisons and the high schools, and see what he can do. Well, he came there and he began gradually to awaken a new spirit. A police captain came to him and said, I want to get that. And he said, well, is there anyone you hate? And he said, there certainly is. And he named a politician. Well, I expect that'd be a good place to begin. What do you think you ought to do about it? Well, I suppose I ought to love him, I ought to pray for him, and I don't know how. You'll have to help me. So they prayed until midnight. The next week a politician came and said, I want to get that. And he said, is anybody you hate? And he said, there certainly is. And they named that police captain. Well, I expect that'd be a good place to begin. What do you think you ought to do about it? Well, I suppose I ought to love him and I ought to pray for him, and I don't know how. You'll have to help me. So they prayed until midnight, and then he said, how'd you like to pray with a police captain? Well, that would be all right. When? Well, how'd be the day after tomorrow? The next night, the police captain came again, and he said, you know, that politician would be willing to pray with you tomorrow. He said he'd be glad to pray with you tomorrow. Well, why wait till tomorrow? Well, it's almost midnight. Well, that doesn't matter with me. I'm a police captain. So they telephoned the politician. He came over, and they prayed until midnight, until 2 o'clock. Today, that politician is mayor of Benton Harbor, the police captain is chief of police, and the crime rate per capita is lower than almost any city in America. If you lived anywhere near Benton Harbor, your church were located within 300 miles, you could just write to them, and a bunch of businessmen get in there, a couple of automobiles, they'd come, they'd fill the platform. Each one would get up and give a 5-minute talk on, their theme would be how to make your city a city of God, how we made our city a city of God. Took a little pinch of leaven, put in 3 measures of meal. You see, take hold of those parables Jesus told and use them. Well, I'm going to tell you the parable I use. I'm going to tell you the thing that I know, because I was brought up in a family of great harmony. I never knew my father and mother to quarrel. We had the 3 brothers, I had 3 boys, 3 girls. And some people that know my family say that Camps Farthest Out are like that because we have that spirit of harmony, a council ring that always in perfect harmony. I have found the statement Jesus gave where 2 or 3 agree, asking anything in my name will be done. And I, because I majored in Greek, found that word agree comes from the same stem that our word harmony, symphony, comes from. So when I was out here a few years ago, at a camp at Asilomar, a Camp Farthest Out, there was a group of University of California men and Leland Stanford men having also in another retreat. The only trouble with Asilomar, so wonderful campground, but it's so big they have to have 2 assembled at the same time. Well, these hard-headed men, the university men who I coached athletes, asked me to come over and give them a talk on a spare afternoon I had. I got up there and began to tell them about the need of following that principle of harmony. And I talked to them about the power of prayer and athletics. I'm going to talk to the Rotary Club tomorrow noon, and I'm going to bring in some of those illustrations. And I could see that I'm believing a thing I said, and so finally I said, 25 years ago, there was a football player at Illinois University called Red Grange. He's been voted the greatest halfback in the history of American football. His team defeated all the Big Ten teams they met by immense scores, and Minnesota was defeated by immense scores by the same team. So when Illinois came up to play Minnesota, I went over to see the game, expecting to see Minnesota win 80-0. But to my surprise, and the surprise of the entire athletic world, Minnesota won 27-7. The next week, one of the men came over and said, Mr. Clark, we used some of your philosophy, and you'd be interested to know why we won that game. The Thursday night before the game, our team met, and we said, we know what's the matter with us. We're divided into 3 rival fraternities. Let's bury the hatchet. And then one of the men said, fellas, there's one thing we haven't tried yet. And they said, what? He said, prayer. Well, not one of them knew how to pray, so they said, surely you suggested it. You'll have to go through with it. And he stammered to a little prayer that they would do their best. And I said to these men, none of you men ever heard of Shooty, but you all heard of Red Grange. Red Grange made 7 points that day, and Shooty made 27 points. The young man in the back seat leaped to his feet and he said, I wasn't believing a thing you said until now. Mr. Shooty's son is my best pal. Mr. Shooty is coach of a college team on the Pacific Coast, and his team wins first place nearly every year in his league. And he has a fine influence on the men than the president of the college has. He said, fellas, you better listen to that guy. He knows what he's talking about. I know what I'm talking about. My father experienced this. He came to Des Moines years ago as a young lawyer to put his savings in a fire insurance company, and every manager of the company was a flop and is going down toward bankruptcy, and finally the board of directors invited my father in and said, Captain Clark, would you be willing to leave your law practice for a few months or maybe for a year and come and see if you could manage to save this company? Well, he didn't know insurance, but he knew men, so he invited in the agents from all over the state, and he said, now we want to make this one big happy family. If there's any of you got a grudge against anyone, let's straighten it out. If you got a grudge against us and the injustice we've done, let us straighten it out. They went out and they doubled their business within a year. He's made managers of agents of another company, they doubled their business within a year. He's made president of another company and they doubled their business within a year. The thing that disturbs me about when it comes to religious things, the way people try to brush it aside and give every other excuse. They'd say that was an accident the first time, the second time they'd say it was a coincidence, but the third time they have to say it was a law. A young man, Ralph Budd, used to come out to our home, and he used to study Father's methods, and when he became president of the Great Northern, I was teaching in the same city where St. Paul, he'd call me to come down to his office. He'd say, I want you to look at my method. I'm using your father's method of building harmony. We have better harmony in the Great Northern than any company in America. They promoted him to be president of Burlington. His little son Johnny now is president of the Great Northern. And when Ralph Budd retired a few years ago, the Time magazine said half the railroad presidents of America were trained by Ralph Budd. A college president was sitting in our Camps Farthest Out at Cronus with a long face, and it got longer all the time, and finally I said, what's the matter? I can't stand any longer. He said, my college, I dread going back to it. It's a great university, Phillips University in Enid, Oklahoma. My faculty meetings are like hell. I'm behind in paying our salaries. We're $57,000 in debt. Well, we had a prayer. 4 years later, I was in Enid, South, giving a series of addresses, the Methodist and the Presbyterian Church, and their 50th anniversary. It was also the 50th anniversary of the opening of the Cherokee Strip. They had me come out to Phillips University and talk in the chapels in the morning, and to my amazement, everything seemed in harmony, in the splendid orchestration. President Briggs put his arm around me, took me into his office and shut the door, and he said, you were surprised, weren't you? And I said, I sure was. Well, I'll tell you what's happened. I came back from your camp, and I sat down for 2 hours with my faculty. I told them about your football teams and about your father's business, and I took that little promise. I said we were supposed to be a Christian university. Jesus promised where 2 or 3 agree, and I asked if they could get into like a symphony of harmony, and they said they'd play the game with me. We paid off the debt. We have 4 new buildings, and they're all paid for. I've been offered the presidency of the State University 4 times to double my salary, and I've turned it down every time. Next year, I'm to be president of the largest men's service club in the world, the Lions Club. And his way was paid all around the world. He gave addresses in Rome, over the radio, and in London and Paris, and always ended up by saying, I found my God in the forests of Minnesota. I know where there's harmony, you've got power. So when I come into a church and they want me to pray for the building fund for another addition, I say, is there harmony? No, we divide into 2 fighting each other. Well, then let's first pray for that harmony. Well, let's go on to another step. Don't think it's going to make you rich. For when I was 40 years old, I had an automobile. On a college professor's salary, I couldn't raise 3 children and make payments on a house and tithe my income and have a car. Well, I didn't want to stop tithing, and I didn't want to go back to renting, and I didn't want to quit my job, and I didn't want to kill off my children, so I decided to go without a car. So we got walking Sunday. My wife had pushed a baby carriage, a little 2 months old. I'd pull a wagon, a little 2-year-old, and our little 4-year-old in a white dress would trot along and inspect all the gutters and the alleys. And after about 10 blocks, we'd come home all exhausted and sit on the porch. Lots of the neighbors brought in their Cadillacs and their Fords to pick beautiful flowers and the beautiful hills of southern Minnesota. One day I said, you know, when the children are little, we ought to have a car, just a cheap touring car for summer. I wish you'd figure up and see if he could afford it. She figured up and she said, if he had $100 more, we could safely make the payments. Otherwise, we'll be in debt for life. I said, in that case, we'd better push the baby carriage. And then I said, now, a little 4-year-old dug a well in the seashore sand last year, and she waited patiently till the tides came in and filled it. She had to wait quite a while, but it came in. Let us think of our need of $100 as a little whale in the seashore sand, and let us have faith that the great ocean of God's abundance can fill it if it's a real need. If it's a shadow of a whale, why enough to fill. Next week, a young man one evening rang our doorbell, said, I represent a Ford agency, and I understand you're thinking of getting a Ford touring car. We haven't told anyone but the Lord. That was the first time I discovered that Henry Ford must have had some private arrangement with Jehovah. We never did know how they discovered we wanted that particular kind of car. Well, we told him the situation. He said, well, you have to decide by a week from Monday whether you can make that payment, because I can't guarantee a car after that date. A week from Monday, an envelope came. I opened it up and out full of check for $108. My wife picked up the check while I read the letter, and it told how I'd been a professor at another college 12 years before, had given $100 to its endowment fund. Now it is becoming a junior college, and was returning the last $100,000 to its donors. I've been connected with colleges all my professional life, and the biggest miracle ever happened to me was a college giving back some of its endowment fund. Well, that made my wife terribly nervous and fearful. She said, you know, all the trustees of McAllister College are Presbyterian ministers, are elders. And they're very strict against anything like New Thought or anything like that. And they hear that we got an automobile by prayer, they'll think we're Christian scientists. I said, see here, the promises in this Bible are meant for Presbyterians just as much as for Christian scientists. And I'm not going to give the Christian Scientists or New Thought or anyone a monopoly. We're going to use these laws of Jesus right here in our church. I want to throw out this little aside that I have brought more Christian Scientists back in the Orthodox churches than anybody in America. Because when they find we can really use these prayers, these laws, in your own comfortable home church, you don't have to run off to these other creeds. So I'm not criticizing these, I call them impatient creeds, because they get impatient with the slowness of our Orthodox churches. We're so afraid to pray for healing or afraid to pray for this. And so my wife was concerned. But I said, tomorrow I'm going to write down and talk to the trustees and tell them, let us pray for a gymnasium. I've had to take my track men out in the deep snow in January, have them wade around and try to get some strength in their muscles. And all the other colleges have nice gymnasiums with indoor tracks. I'm going down and just tell them I'm getting tired. They're waiting to raise money. And let's turn it over and let the Lord help us. Oh, don't, Glenn, don't. Then they will fire you. But I'll admit, that was found how they could supposing a little college professor walks and say, now you trustees don't know nothing. I want to tell you something. I know how to do this thing and you don't. I didn't know how to defend anybody. My wife was pretty smart, but I went to see an old lady. I said, what do you think of my going down and see the trustees about this? She said, you and your wife been praying for that gym, Dave? I said, yes. Well, you know, you won't have to see the trustees. I got a wonderful revelation as you were talking. I could see that gymnasium coming. It's going to come before anyone expects it. It's going to come this year. It's going to come from a student in your writing class. Well, I was getting a little too specific, and I wanted to see what it looked like. So I said, thank you very much. And I went home, and I said to my wife, I've decided to take your advice and not see the trustees. And then I told her that strange prophecy, and we laughed it aside. But in the middle of winter, a little sophomore girl in my writing class came up and said, can I see you, Prof? And I said, I'm sorry. I thought, there's some important people I promised I'd see, and I turned my back on the gymnasium. I left the gymnasium standing there in the center of the table, and center of the room. And I don't to this day remember who those important people were, but I do know this. 2 days later, when that class convened again, here's that little girl. She said, you know, Prof, we cheer the football boys, and we give them sweaters, and we give them a banquet at the end of the season. But I worked for one of the trustees this year, and I found that 6 of them have worked for the college for 20 years. And we've never given anything to them, sweaters or banquets or anything. I thought it'd be nice if the students, not the faculty, but just the students, would give a party to the trustees. You know, my knees got weak. I could see the gymnasium floating in. I had to go back and sit in a chair. I said, that isn't your idea. She said, what do you mean? I said, that's God's idea. Oh, I know what you mean. Ordinary an idea comes, and I can push it aside. But this one wrestles with me every night, like Jacob's angel won't let me go. And I just thought I should see you, and you're the only one I told it to. Well, let's you and me pick out 5 representative students. Captain Domes of the football team, he's a good speaker, and Jean McBeady, a champion girl debater, and they picked out 5 speakers. Let them present that at the next convocation to the student body and see what they do. And then if it goes through, then let you and me appoint a committee on arrangements. Oh, no, she said, if it goes through, let them appoint the committee. I only have one request. Don't tell any of the students I had anything to do with it. Well, now there's a tremendous leverage. When you can take and erase yourself out of the picture, that lets Jesus in. They gave the party. The trustees all came. They were so thrilled. The next week they sat around the table, and one of them said, you know, those are wonderful boys and girls. They're just like our sons and daughters, aren't they? We ought to do something for them. But what do they need? Well, they need a gymnasium. Elder person and older person, let's give them a gymnasium. So they laid $200,000 on the table. The finest gymnasium of any college in the Middle West went up. We had an open winter, something I'd never heard of before. You could put a spade in the ground in February, and there the gymnasium stands. I invite you to come up and see the great gymnasium. Well, it so happened that my long-distance runner, my champion, Jimmy Dixon, fell in love with this Lillian, and he married her when they graduated. And they went over to Formosa, and they become the greatest missionaries in the world. When we were over there, she took us out and had us address the lepers. Lepers were killing themselves, the hopeless, and she went out and began to convert them to Jesus and the hope of immortality. And you'll find in this picture, I suggested that you get that book, Wings of Prayer, you'll find the choir. Beautiful girls there, happy faces. They sang for us. Instead of now all in gloom, Daniel Poling says that she's the greatest missionary in the world. When we were in Ceylon, Stanley Jones came to our Camps Farthest Out and gave an address, and he said, if you're going to Formosa, I want to tell you about a wonderful missionary. Her first name is Lillian, but I can't remember her last name. And I said, her last name is Dixon. Roland Brown said she was a student of Glen Clark. Yes, her husband is president of the Presbyterian Theological Seminary. He's my champion long-distance runner, Jimmy Dixon. They have been going up where the headhunters were and converting them by the thousands. The headhunters where you wouldn't have been safe in the past. And they're being converted so fast that they have built with their own hands 175 churches, the fastest growing movement in the history of modern missions. And instead of cutting off heads in order to get popular, they don't let them join the church until they save the soul. Isn't that different? Instead of cutting off heads now, bring home a head, they bring home a soul. Well, I just want to tell you that Lillian Dixon, some of them here said they get letters from her, and she said, I just want to tell you all that background. Now I'm going to tell you the greatest leverage of all. It's Jesus and his power of forgiveness. Tomorrow morning when I talk about the trip around the world, I'm going to tell you of the conversion of the man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, Captain Fushida, and how he's become the greatest dynamic evangelist in Japan. The man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor, because he found the forgiveness of Jesus Christ. Well, I want to tell you something that'll stir you. Down in the Camp Farthest Out, the last one I was in last year is in North Carolina, where Helen Carnes was the chairman. A beautiful blonde lady came in, a young woman up in the 30s. She went by and then she stopped and she gave me a terrific hug. Well, that was embarrassed one out there in the crowd of people around. But later, she had to tell us her story. She said, for 35 years, I worshipped my God. And my God was my own human father, my earthly father. I didn't see a God up there. I just adored my father. When he got too old to do the ordinary work, he got a job as a night watchman. And the brutal criminal broke in and brutally murdered him. I hated that man so that I went into a total collapse. When I came to, I took to drink. I was a complete alcoholic for 5 months, and then I phoned, and my friends phoned the AAs, the Alcoholics Anonymous, to come and pull me out of the hospital. She showed me a picture of this man after he committed that murder, and it was the face of a fiend. They put him in life imprisonment. She said, I came to the Camp Farthest Out, and someone said, you've got to forgive that man. And then she said, I saw Dr. Clark, and he said, forgiveness won't be enough. You've got to love him. So she went down to a little outdoor chapel and prayed that she'd be able to forgive and to love, and finally it began to come. She said, that was 2 years ago. She said, 4 years ago, my cup runneth over with whiskey. 2 years ago, my cup ran over with love. This year, I didn't bring just a cup, I brought a bucket. Frank Laubach here told me I should kick the bottom out and let that love of God keep flowing through and helping others. And I began to use all the influence I had. I wrote to people I thought had influence to see if they couldn't get me into the penitentiary so I could go and tell that man that I'd forgiven him. But all the doors were closed. Well, we'd learned how to pray at the Camp Farthest Out, and I said, well, then why don't I pray about it? So she got down on her knees and she prayed that that criminal would break out and escape. All silly prayers. What do you think of that? That he'd escape and that she could find him and tell him that she'd forgiven him. And the prayer was answered, and the papers were full of the thing this horrible criminal had broken out. And everybody there locked their houses. This murderer. A carload of detectives came out. The chief detectives came in, and she said, oh, you're the one I want to see. Won't you help catch that man so I can tell him I forgive him? Oh, don't, nothing doing. You'll never see him alive. We're stationing detectives all over this territory, and the orders are to shoot at sight. That man is going to come out here and try to kill you. And he sat down in the chair and said, well, good, I wish you'd go. And she said, no, I'm going to sit here all night. I'm going to sit here on guard all night. The next day, he was having a hamburger in a restaurant, and a bus driver came in and said, I think the man you're looking for just got off this bus. He went out and drew his revolver and took him prisoner. Put shackles on him, took him up into the hotel, phoned for him to bring in a patrol wagon, and then he phoned this lady, Mary Sutton, beautiful blonde lady. She went. She stood before this man who killed her father brutally. She said, you know God. I don't know nothing about God. Did you ever pray? No, Mom. Well, I'll pray for you. And she gave a prayer. Then she said, I want to tell you that God has forgiven you. And I have forgiven you. God loves you, and I love you. And he said, thanks, lady. And I saw a picture of him as he was carried off, manacled by the detective. And it's a face that had a light in it. A newborn man. Right while we were there at the camp, she got a call. A minister wanted to come to church. She got up and she told her story, and there wasn't a dry eye in that church. Phoned phone calls, women writing in, fallen women, alcoholic women from all over the state would come there, and she'd just heal them like that. They could believe anything. If a woman could forgive a man who killed her father in the name of Jesus Christ, then they knew that Jesus Christ's power was great enough to save them, and they were saved. And then and then she left. The word came that she was to speak in the penitentiary. And she's written me what a wonderful effect it had as she spoke. And so, when Jesus said, forgive them, for they know not what they do, and when he hung on the cross that our sins could be wiped away. Starr Daily, that someday you should hear, the most powerful message bringer in America when he's at his best. And he's usually at his best. You know, and he's a little heavy. Sometimes he gets a little bit heavy, he said. And all the weight of these things. Theosophist said, you will have to go through 77 reincarnations of suffering to pay off, make atonement for the, what they call it, the karma. Pay off the karma of the 25 years of crime you've had. It'll be like a mole eating its way through a mountain. Starr said, no. He said, Jesus Christ has washed away all my sins. I won't have to go through those 77 reincarnations. I found wonderful religions. I'll say we shouldn't yank away the beautiful culture, the old ancient culture of the Hindus and the Buddhists. Let them use it for the Old Testament if they want to. Some of it's as good as our Old Testament, or parts of it. But I want to say this. I got to say this. Christianity has something that no other religion has, no matter how fine, wonderful the religion is. And there's some wonderful folks you'll find over there, foreign countries, following their religion. But Jesus washed out things. The Mohammedans get down on their prayer rug 5 times a day. They're a lot more pious, and I get ashamed of our religious, cold-blooded Christians. They don't even pray to God once, some of them. But they believe in Jesus as the prophet. But they say at the last minute, Judas was substituted in his place, and Judas hung on the cross, and Jesus didn't die on the cross, didn't die for our sins, and they have to, there's something lacking. You go back to Jesus hanging on the cross, and then you can say he's done something that has taken something out of me, and because of that, the sins are taken out, and that Mary Sutton was able to forgive that sinner. And now that he knows that there's a forgiveness like that of a sweet woman, he'll have faith that there's a sweet Christ up there can do it in a big way. And that man, the worst sinner in North Carolina, might someday become the greatest soul there. For I'll never forget the story that Starr told me when he was in a house with all his instruments around him, in front of a safe, in dead of night, and he heard a footstep on the stair, and he turned on his flashlight, and he saw a priest coming down. He drew his gun. He said, you take another step, and I'll shoot the daylight through you. And the priest said, I mean you no harm, and he came on. You take another step at your peril. I mean you no harm. And the priest came and turned on the light, sat down in his chair, and he said, what do you want? I want your money. I can get you the money. He said, but I can open that safe and save you all that work. But before I give you the money, I want to ask you what you plan to do with it. I'll drink it up. What I don't drink up, I'll eat up. Let me tell you what I was planning to do with it. There's a little lame boy down the alley. I want to see that he gets some crutches. There's an old lady down the street that doesn't have enough food. I want to see that she gets her pint of milk every day. And he opened the safe, and he went on telling the things he was going to do, and he gave him the money. He said, you must be hungry, brother. Come out here. And he spread food on the table for him, and Starr Daily sat down, and he ate abundantly. He rose, and he went to the door, and the priest said, you forgot something, brother. What? Why, you left the money that I just gave you. You left the money right here on this table. If I took that money, I couldn't digest this food. Today, Starr Daily has saved more souls than that priest has saved. I just want to close here that with all these levers that you'll find in the parables that you can get hold of in your life, you can go back right to Jesus and apply it. If any of you here has the privilege of having somebody done some injustice to you and have been badly treated, if you can rise up to the place and forgive them, you will release the power by which you can begin to, the whole world will feel the effect of it. Let's pray.